Beverly Julius was born Beverly Berardi in Coal Creek, Colorado in September of 1921. Her mother's family, the McCloneys, were Irish and came from the tobacco fields of Kentucky. Beverly's father's family came from Italy in the 1880s. Here Beverly describes growing up in a small Colorado coal town in the 1920s and 30s. So, Bev Julius, thanks for joining us and being part of the Garfield County Library's Big Read. The first question I want to ask is have you tell me where your people came from. Where did you immigrate from?
All right. I don't know about my mother's family when they came to the United States, but they were here long before the Civil War. And she had an uncle, Colonel Landrum, that fought in the Civil War. But then when they lived in Kentucky and had big tobacco warehouses. And then my grandpa and grandma moved to Kansas, and he worked in the bank. And then they moved on to Florence, Colorado, and he invested in a smelter there. And
So he had a little money that he made through working at the bank and
yeah,
went west.
They were. They had money through the tobacco farms.
What kind of smelter was it?
Oh goodness, I don't remember. It was at Florence, but I can't remember
Okay,
what they did. I'd never been there. I knew where it was located.
So were you born in Florence?
No, I was born in Coal Creek, and it was a mining town south of Florence, about 3 miles. And my father was a coal miner, and he was born here after his folks came from Italy. And he was born in 1895.
1895.
And, yes.
Where was he born? Do you remember?
I would suppose in Coal Creek, but I don't know.
What year were you born?
1921. I'm 91 years old.
What was it like growing up in Coal Creek?
It was wonderful. On the one side of the town, all of the Italians lived. And on the other side of the town, the Welsh and the Scotch lived. And my folks were friends with some of the Welsh and Scotch, but they hardly met. I mean, they didn't mingle like that. My Italian side of the family was a lot more fun to be with than the others, anyhow. We lived there until I was in the 4th grade, and then we moved to Florence.
So what was you said that the Italian side was much more fun. What sort of things do you remember, the fun side of your family?
Well, one thing I remember is that when we'd go to Grandpa's, they cooked outside in what they called a shanty, and then brought all the food into the table, and we'd go there every Sunday for Sunday dinner. And as soon as my dad saw, they always had wine or brandy on the table, and as soon as my dad would see that his dad was getting a little happy, he'd say, "Get your coats, we're going home." But one of the things that I remember doing was my cousin went out and found a donkey. The boys always chased donkeys. He hit her, and he put it with a cart and put us little kids in it. And we went with him, and he jerked the donkey around until we got to where there was I guess it was a pine tree for pine cones. And we gathered them for him, and then we took them back, and he built a fire and put a big pot of water on it, boiled them, and when they started to pop, well, he'd take them off, and we'd help pick the seeds out of them.
Oh, the pine nuts.
Yeah. So, and my dad, when miniature golf started, we had a lot between us and another family on the other side of the lot, and he was a bootlegger. But anyhow, my dad went out and made the holes and made a golf course, and then he took us to the dump, and he got the braces for the roof of an old car, and he cut them. They were like that, and he cut them and made us all golf clubs.
Was it a neighborhood thing?
Oh goodness, the kids used to always play outside, and ours was a good meeting place because we were the only ones that had swings and a teeter-totter and a trapeze in the yard. And my dad, between the coal shed and the garage, put a playhouse for me. And so we had a lot of kids playing.
Boy, this was quite the dad, huh?
He was very bright, belonged to Oddfellows, and he did child welfare work for Oddfellows. He belonged to a math club, and when we bring home lessons, we'd all have to sit around the dining room table, and my dad would sit there and he'd be reading, and as soon as we needed help, well, he was right there, and I never would have got through advanced algebra if I hadn't had him.
So how was he educated? Did he had that?
He was through high school, but he was the valedictorian of his class. But then he went to work in the mine because they had a mine there, the Bluff Springs. He and his brothers and father ran it.
They ran the mine, so they were managers of the mine.
They were, yeah. And then my mother would drive up to the mine once or twice a week, and we'd walk down the slope, and when they'd come out of the mine in the cart, and we'd get to carry his lunchbox home, and he was always glad to meet us, and I had a wonderful family life.
Talk about some of those memories of your family life. What are some of those special things that you remember of your parents and your family?
Well, my mom was a linotype operator before she married at Rocky Mountain News, but she was just home, and we did chores, and we played, and she took us to the library every week, and we always brought books home for my dad. And
so both your parents were pretty well read then, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
And they instilled that in you.
Right. And they said, there were 5 of us in the family, and they said, you will all go to college. It was during the Depression when I went, and my dad took me, and he paid the tuition, he said, and gave me some money, and he said, now you'll have to go to work. So I cleaned house for one teacher, and I did supper dishes for another, and then I got a job in the library for 30 cents an hour.
While you were going to school?
While I was going to school.
Where did you go to school?
At Western State.
So your parents made sure that
the
family was going to go on.
But we all worked, too.
Right. But a lot of, and particularly for women at that time, that was, there weren't a lot of women going to college, not near as many as there should have been, right?
But like I said in my book, I was well prepared because of what I got out of school, when I got out of school.
What are your memories of that? I mean, the Great Depression, and the big read book is The Grapes of Wrath, where people were suffering and had hard times. What do you remember of that?
We didn't. We ate a lot of fried potatoes and salad, and there was a time we even ate dandelion salad, and went to the Penrose, picked fruit, canned it. The boys worked on the farms there around Florence, picking beans, and they wouldn't let me go with them because they didn't want to be embarrassed.
Was money tight for your family, or did you do pretty well that way?
There was a time when we when we were more affluent than others. Yeah, and money became scarce. what was it that they had?
The
Where
CCC
the
camps and
people that needed jobs could work. They worked out in the forest and all, and my
Right.
dad did that. And then when he came back and the mine was going again, he worked until he was hurt in the mine, and then he was in charge of all the blasting for the Penrose Cement Company, and then he did carpentry work.
So early on, he was part of the CCC project.
Yeah, but what
went
wasn't called that?
to WPA.
WPA.
How was he hurt in the mine?
Rock fell on him, and it broke his hip.
Did he fully recover from that, or was that something he suffered with? You talked about your dad building basically a playground in this town, not only for you, but for all these other kids.
Well,
what was
all
it that
the kids came. And even when we lived in Florence, kids played. I mean, whether they played marbles or jacks or all kinds of games. Kids didn't sit in the house.
So you'd play.
We played kick the can and run sheepy run and hide and go seek, and when we were in school, we could take a pocket knife to school. The boys played mumbledy-peg, and the girls played real estate with their knives.
Why not explain that game to me?
Well, we'd draw a big ring about the size of that, if you drew it right there from wall to wall, a big circle, and we'd put a line down it. And then I'd say, this is my property and that's your property. Then we'd throw our knives and it would stick, and whichever way the handle pointed, then we drew a line and enlarged our property. And then we played until we couldn't put our foot in the property line anymore.
Yeah, I was wondering about knives and real estate. How that was going to turn out.
Yeah, and we jumped rope and
Now explain mumbly-peg to those
I
that
can't really
don't.
remember mumbledy-peg, except they'd take their knives and flip them, but they would do something to see who would go first. That boys played mumbledy-peg, and they would, whatever they were doing, they'd pound the peg in the ground, and then the loser had to take it out with his teeth.
I see.
But I don't remember how they played that.
Well, nowadays you can get sent home for a long time for bringing a knife to school, and you're
But
saying that
everyone had a knife.
they were all part of the playground.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And if you wanted a rope to jump, you'd go and ask the janitor if you could get a rope and play jump rope. And girls always carried their jacks. And
Your father was a special person, obviously, and where did he get the skills to fashion all these various things that he?
I don't know. He was just. We'd sit around the table and he'd make us. We'd all work. And then later we'd get to listen to something on the radio. I Love a Mystery or something. He read all the time. He didn't go to the library like my mom took us to the library. And yet when I started reading the Cronin books about the Welsh, he read all of those, The Keys of the Kingdom and all of those books. And when I checked out Gone with the Wind, the librarian called my mother and said, "Do you want Beverly to read that book?" My mom said, "Is it in the library?" "Yes." "Well, then she can read it." But my dad read a lot.
That was Beverly Julius recalling life in a small Colorado coal town in the 1920s and 30s. To hear more of Beverly's story, please click on Part 2.